I was barefoot, half distracted, sipping lukewarm tea in my father's empty house when the front door opened. At first, I thought it was Dad, home early from one of his never-ending meetings. I didn't even bother looking up. Just yelled, "Hey, you're back early," in that casual tone daughters use when they've lived in the same house their whole life. But then I heard the footsteps. Lighter. Slower. Intentional. And then I saw him. Dylan. The intern. Tall, sharp-shouldered, with his usual dark slacks and rolled-up sleeves. But something was off, the tension around his jaw, the way he didn't look at the floor or the framed family photos like he usually did. His eyes found mine immediately, and didn't move. I blinked. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice already thinner than I wanted. He didn't answer right away. He just walked in calm, sure, and closed the door behind him. I heard the lock click. That sound sent a shiver down my spine. And still those eyes, not boyish, not unsure like they were when he trailed behind my father during boardroom meetings. This wasn't the same Dylan who stammered when I passed him coffee last week. This Dylan stood in my doorway like he belonged there. Like he'd been waiting for this moment. "You're alone?" he asked. Not curious. Confirming. I nodded slowly. My fingers tightened around the mug. He stepped closer. Just enough that I could see how his breath moved across his collarbone. Good. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask what the hell was going on, but I didn't. Because something about the air had changed. It wasn't heavy. It was thick. Electric. And I suddenly couldn't remember how to form normal questions. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. Then, without warning, he said the words that made my breath catch in my throat. "I didn't take this internship for your father," he said quietly, eyes still locked on mine. "I took it for you." My heart thundered against my ribs. "What do you mean?" But again I didn't say it. Because something inside me already knew. He held the notebook like it was something fragile. Sacred. My eyes darted between it and his face, trying to read him. But Dylan wasn't looking at the book anymore, he was watching me. Closely. Like every blink, every shift of my fingers told him something. "You probably never noticed me," he said, voice low, steady. "Back then, I mean. In college. You were always on the steps outside the library, headphones in, dancing like you forgot people were watching." I felt my stomach drop. That was years ago. I hadn't thought about that version of myself in forever. Carefree. Reckless. A little high on life. A little heartbroken over someone I barely remember now. He smiled like he saw the memory playing behind my eyes. "You were wearing a red hoodie the first time I saw you. The sleeves were too long, and you kept tucking your hands into them." I swallowed hard. "You went to USC, I said. Not a question. Just an echo of recognition. "You were in that photojournalism program." He nodded once. I was the invisible guy with the camera. Always watching. Always wanting. The room felt suddenly too warm. He stepped closer and I didn't move. Couldn't. His presence filled the space between us. Not just physically, but with this quiet burning intensity that made my skin hum. "I watched you for months. Then years," he said. "And when I heard your father was offering an internship," he lifted the notebook, "I knew I had to get close. Somehow." There was something terrifying and beautiful about the way he said it. Not desperate, not creepy. Just honest. Like this was the first time he'd let himself tell the truth, and it was heavier than he expected. I stared at the notebook in his hand. My voice came out softer than I meant. "What's in there?" His thumb brushed the cover. "Pages," he whispered. "Of you." My breath hitched. "Photos. Drawings. Notes about things you said. Things you wore. The way your eyes look when you're pretending to be annoyed. The songs you hum when you think no one's listening." I felt my knees weaken. "You made a diary?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "I made a map," he said. "To you." And then he handed it to me. I took the notebook with hands that didn't feel like mine. It was warm from his touch, soft, worn around the edges like something loved too hard for too long. I hesitated before opening it, aware that whatever I found inside would change something I couldn't put back. The first page was a sketch. Me. Not a perfect likeness, not polished or posed. Just real. Me curled up in the corner booth of a campus cafe, hair falling across my cheek, one hand wrapped around a paper cup. I stared at it stunned. He'd captured something about me I didn't even know could be seen. Not beauty, not glamour. Something else. Something more naked than either. I drew that the day after you laughed at something I said in line, he said, almost shy now. You probably don't even remember. But I'd never seen someone light up like that. I turned the page. Photos printed, faded, some candid, some close-up. Me walking with friends. Me biting a pen cap. Me in the rain, coat forgotten, mascara running down my cheek. I didn't even know anyone had been watching me then. You remembered everything, I whispered. Everything, he said. My heart was racing. I should have been unnerved. Maybe I was. But mostly, I felt exposed in a way that made my skin ache with heat. I flipped further. There were little paragraphs in the margins, messy handwriting, like he couldn't write fast enough to get it all out. Notes about how I moved. How I laughed. How he imagined my voice sounded at night when no one else was around. I pressed my palm to the page, feeling dizzy. And then I said the thing I didn't know I was going to say until it was already out of my mouth. Why now? Dylan looked at me, and for a moment he didn't answer. His throat moved as he swallowed, then he said quietly, because I saw the way you looked at me last week. In your father's office. My stomach flipped. You looked at me like you weren't sure who I was anymore. Like maybe you saw a man standing there, not just your dad's intern. And I thought, maybe finally you were ready to feel what I've been feeling for years. He stepped closer again, and this time I didn't back away. You're not scared? He asked softly. I think I am, I breathed. But you're still standing here. And he was right. Something shifted in the air between us, that invisible thread that had always existed, now pulled so tight it felt like breath itself was strung along it. I closed the notebook slowly, carefully, like it might burn me if I moved too fast. Then I looked up. And there he was, still, quiet, waiting. Not pushing. Just there. Watching me with that same impossible stillness he'd had since the moment he walked in. Like he knew the storm was happening inside me now. I don't know what this is, I said, barely trusting my voice. I don't know what to do with it. He stepped forward, just one step, and I didn't move away. I'm not asking for anything, he said. Not unless you want to give it. But this, I gestured toward the notebook in my hand. It's too much. He nodded slowly. It was never meant for you to see. But I couldn't keep pretending anymore. Not after last week. What happened last week? His gaze darkened, softened. You touched my arm. I blinked. That's it. No, he said, his voice low. You touched my arm and then you paused. Like you felt something too. Like maybe you remembered I wasn't a boy anymore. My breath caught in my throat. I had paused. I remembered the heat under his shirt sleeve, the sharp edge of his muscle under my fingers. I told myself it was nothing. Reflex. But I hadn't stopped thinking about it since. You noticed that? I said quietly. I noticed everything, he whispered. I didn't even realize I was walking until I was standing in front of him, the space between us thin as a whisper. He reached up, slow, so slow, and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. It wasn't the touch that made me tremble. It was the care. The permission he was asking without words. And the way my body answered before I could. You scare me, I said, not moving. Good, he said. I scare myself too. I didn't know who leaned in first. Maybe it was both of us. But there was a moment, just before it happened, when our breaths mingled and I could feel the tremble in his chest match mine. And then his lips hovered just above mine. Not touching. Just waiting. Say stop, he breathed, and I will. But I didn't. I couldn't. The space between us dissolved like it had never existed. His mouth found mine in a kiss that didn't ask, didn't rush, didn't apologize. It was warm and quiet and full of things we hadn't dared to say until now. And it didn't feel like the beginning of something reckless. It felt like the breaking of a dam. Like all the hours, all the pages, all the quiet want between us had been leading to this exact second. I felt his hand on the small of my back. Not pulling, not pressing, just there. Anchoring me. My hands drifted up his chest, and I could feel his heartbeat under my fingertips. Unsteady. Human. Real. There was a tremble in the way he kissed me, like he was holding something in. Even as he gave so much away. And maybe I was too. Because as his fingers brushed along the side of my neck, I didn't just feel his touch. I felt everything it meant. Every word he hadn't said, every glance I'd ignored. Every long night when he watched me from the other side of a dream I didn't even know I was in. We weren't frantic. We weren't loud. We were careful. Almost reverent. He pulled back just barely and I felt his breath against my lips. "Is this really happening?" he asked. I nodded. My voice wouldn't come, but my body answered. The way I leaned into him. The way my eyes wouldn't let his go. He kissed me again, slower this time. Deeper. Like he wanted to memorize the taste of this moment. My legs felt weak. We sank onto the couch behind me. Bodies folding into each other like pieces of a story we'd been trying not to write. His hand moved to my waist, and I felt his fingers tremble slightly against my skin. It made me ache. Because he wasn't trying to conquer me. He was trying to feel me. To hold what he'd wanted for so long and finally know that I wanted it too. And I did. God, I did. The light from the window caught on his face, soft, golden, like the sun knew something had changed. And for a long time we didn't speak. There were no jokes. No explanations. Just hands. Breath. The kind of quiet that only comes when two people stop pretending. When we paused, still wrapped in each other, I whispered something I didn't expect. "I don't think I'll ever see myself the same way again." He smiled against my cheek. "Good," he said. "Because I never saw you the way you saw yourself." We didn't move for a while. His hand rested against my hip, fingers drawing slow, invisible lines along the hem of my shirt. I felt every one of them like a whisper. Not just on my skin, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere soft. I curled into him, cheek against his shoulder, listening to the steady rise and fall of his breath. It was strange the way silence could feel louder than words. But it wasn't awkward. It was full. Like we were still speaking, just not with our mouths. He looked down at me. "I used to imagine this." I smiled. This exact moment. You in my arms. Quiet. Warm. Real." His thumb brushed along my side, and I felt it like a slow tide pulling me under. Not drowning, just surrendering. Letting go. "I used to imagine it too," I whispered. "But I didn't know it was you." He didn't say anything to that. Just pressed his lips to my temple like he understood. Like he'd waited long enough to know not to rush the truth when it finally arrived. I turned to face him fully. Our legs tangled. My fingers slid along the line of his jaw. "You scare me," I said again. "Why?" he asked, brushing his nose against mine. "Because I think I wanted this long before I let myself feel it." His gaze flickered. "I used to wonder what it would be like," he said. "If you ever looked at me like I wasn't just someone passing through your father's world. If you ever saw me." "I see you now," I said. And I did. Not the intern. Not the quiet guy with a camera. Not even the boy who'd built a private universe around me in a notebook. I saw the man who'd waited. Who'd watched. Who'd felt so much for so long that when the moment finally came, he didn't explode, he melted. He pulled me close again and I let him. I let my body fall into his like it belonged there. Like the shape of him had always been meant to fit the space I never knew was empty. The sun had dipped lower now, casting gold over the living room floor. Everything felt suspended, like time was honoring what had just happened. And then, quietly, almost nervously, he asked, "What happens now?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I kissed him, slow and thoughtful, like a promise I wasn't ready to speak out loud yet. And when I pulled away, I said the only thing that felt true. "I think we just keep breathing." And we did. Later, I found myself alone in my room, the notebook on my lap. The house was quiet again, too quiet after what had passed between us. Like the walls were holding their breath, trying not to break the spell. But it was already broken. Or maybe, transformed. I opened the last few pages. His handwriting was rushed there, less neat, almost frantic. The words slanted like his thoughts were too heavy to hold still. "I keep waiting for the moment she sees me. I wonder if she'll hate me for keeping this. Maybe it's better if I never tell her." I ran my fingers along the ink like I could touch the moment he wrote it. Like I could feel the weight of all the hours he'd spent longing in silence. And then on the very last page, in smaller writing, almost hesitant, he'd written something that made my chest tighten. "If she ever kisses me, I'll never want anyone else again." I closed the notebook, hands trembling. The knock on my door was soft. I turned and he was standing there, hair tousled, expression unsure for the first time since he walked in earlier that day. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I crossed the room, stopped in front of him, and placed the notebook in his hands. "You don't need this anymore," I said gently. "You don't have to imagine me." He looked at me and something shifted in his eyes, like he hadn't let himself believe this could really be happening, even after everything. I still want to remember, he said quietly. Then start here, I whispered, taking his hand. With me. For real this time. And he did.